Hello guys, and welcome to my contribution as a part of the YouTube Artist Collective theme, Vintage. If you want to know who else is participating in this theme, please be sure to check out the comment section down below to see all the other members of the YouTube Artist Collective as well as the guest members. What is the YouTube Artist Collective? Well, we are a group of YouTube artists who every few months collaborate on a theme as chosen by you guys, and we basically draw what we feel the idea is. Anyone can take part in these themes. You don't have to be a part of the collective to participate, and if you do participate, I want to see what you draw down below. Please share your work. It's always nice to see other people taking part in themes. As a collective, we are a community and we should all draw and enjoy what we do, and of course just being creative. So I had a lot of ideas for the theme Vintage, and if you want to check out what everyone else has contributed to the collective down below, there will be a playlist as well as links to everyone who's participating down below. I know we have a few guest artists, and if you are interested in being a part of the YouTube Artist Collective and would like to contribute, please be sure to check out the Facebook link down below as well, so that you can see about participating if you are interested. We're always looking for guest artists, so if you feel like you want to kind of give it a go, message us on the YouTube Artist Collective page on Facebook and we will get back to you. So, the theme Vintage. I have a lot of ideas when it comes to vintage, and I kind of get the sort of fashion-y sense from it. My first thought was to do a 1920s sort of cabaret style, 1920s like flapper style, and I went through a lot of phases of trying to pinpoint what I really wanted my ideas to be. And then I got thinking about like the pin-up style and the rockabilly fashion, and kind of how vintage in a modern day era is paying homage to a lot of different fashion types. So kind of this is what my idea was for this piece. I wanted a rockabilly fashion girl who is in the modern world, but she's obsessed with vintage things. So she has vintage cameras, she has vintage bags, she has vintage record player. She's an old school sort of girl. And I had this sort of idea of a pin-up style illustration, but I also wanted to pay homage to some comics from the 1980s. So it's kind of a mix match of different themes, and I'm kind of going to explain why I've gone for the comic idea. When I was younger, I was obsessed with these comics called the Bunty comics and the Archie comics, and I really loved how, even though the colour palettes were very limited in early comic strips, I just really liked how the colours really popped and how illustration really popped in that sort of aspect. Before screen tone was really introduced, like comics had a very limited palette because of what printers could and couldn't print. So you'd sometimes have a comic and they'd only have red and black in it, and maybe a half tone of pink, because that's what they had available to them at the time. Printing's expensive, and before colour comics were really a interesting full-time thing, we really didn't have that much around. And if you go back in history and have a look among comic book history, you could see some amazing examples of limited palettes that people had, that they were able to introduce into the comics and make their comics seem a little bit more interesting. So why do I keep going back to this comic theme? Well, it was something that kind of fascinated me when I was younger, and I thought that really fit within the theme Vintage. I didn't want it to just be about fashion. I wanted the entire piece to have a vintage style around it. Now, I won't be putting this piece up for sale because I feel like it's not one of my best pieces, but I'll have prints available up on the Redbubble store if anyone wants to get a print of this. I kept it very limited, and I decided not to fill an entire page, more like a middle part of a page, because I kind of wanted it to have like a comic panel feel. If I'd had a little bit more time, I probably would have done a series of these illustrations so that they would have gone all together. But overall, I think it's fairly successful for what I wanted it to achieve. Now, if I really wanted the colour to be flat, when I was using my alcohol markers, instead of just like streaking them all around, I would colour in small circles, and I would also use the chisel end at the tip. Because if you look at some of the old school style comics from the 1970s and 1980s, and some even 1990s, where the print was sometimes didn't quite match up where the lines were, so you'd have this sort of shifting effect. Now alcohol markers do bleed, so I thought I'd use this to my advantage and play on that sort of aspect. I also used very limited line work. I tried to use as little line work as possible. Now normally I would go all in on clothes folding details. I would like go in with my pencil crayons and really sharpen up edges of where I wanted shading to be, but shading really wasn't a massive thing in early comic book history. We didn't have a lot of it, and a lot of shading that was done with either very harsh black undertones or with minimal hatching and cross hatching to create the desired effect that people wanted. And I think that's really fascinating to see how far we've not only become in the comic industry, but how far we've also come in the art world as well. Printing really did affect art. It affected printed art, it affected printed illustrations, and due to the limitations of what a printer could achieve, well, whereas now we have every colour under the rainbow, back then there wasn't as much. So I tried to convey that as well. I think I was fairly successful. I mean, there's still a lot that could be changed and a lot that could be tweaked, but overall I'm really happy with the way that the illustration is. And when I'd finished the piece, I did ask other people for feedback, and like when I showed them the illustration, asked them what it reminded them of, and a lot of people did say it reminded them like old school pin-up art or old school like style illustrations on old like the Archie comics and that, and I'm really glad that that message was conveyed. If you guys had the theme vintage, what would you do? What do you get? What ideas do you get with the idea of vintage? I personally get the idea of like going into like old vintage style shops and looking at the old vintage fashions, and or going into charity shops and finding like very old school sort of like musical instruments and stuff like that. I think vintage can conjure up so many different ideas for a lot of different people that it's really interesting to see how everyone's ideas develop. And speaking of some of the other work that I have seen so far from people who've participated in this collective, it looks absolutely amazing, a massive variety of styles, and I feel so honoured to be a part of this community. There isn't much I could say really about this art. Overall, I really enjoyed doing it. It's a lot simpler than my normal style, because normally I would really go in, but I really had to think about colours. I couldn't have too many colours merging with each other, and I tried to limit myself to, I believe I ended up only using 10 markers in the end, and normally I would use like a variety of markers and a variety of like watercolours and pencil crayons to build up texture. And by limiting myself, I was really having to think about where colour placement was going to go. I couldn't go crazy with it. I think in a way she kind of looks like a modern day vintage Snow White, or kind of like Veronica from the Archie comics, which I'm going to keep on going back to. But overall, I'm quite happy with the piece. I hope it conveys the message really well. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of the piece down below? There is quite a few places that I would fix overall, but you know, you don't know if stuff isn't going to work until you try it. And out of all the ideas that I did have, I believe that this was the most successful that I could have conveyed overall. So what do you think our next YouTube Artist Collective theme should be? I know I haven't really participated in the last few due to time constraints, but I'm really excited to see what the next theme always is. What would you want to see the theme? And if you could choose any theme, what would be your dream theme? Ooh, that sounds kind of interesting. Dream theme. So after I had finished the line work and went over with markers, I decided to thicken some areas with my line work to kind of give it more of a standout feel. I also cross-hatched a little bit more in some areas to try and create the desired effect. Overall, it is simple, but I think it works. I think it does help convey the theme. Yes, it's not the most elaborate piece I've ever done, but you know, I like it. It's different. It's definitely different. And I think I'll probably do some more pieces like this in the future. So this is a few final looks over the piece, and these are all the markers I used. I either used lemon or canary, I couldn't remember, so I included them both. But as you can see, I tried to keep to a very limited palette. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I really did enjoy being a part of this collective theme, and if you guys wouldn't mind, check out everyone else's pieces and see how they did. Hope you guys have enjoyed my contribution to the YouTube Artist Collective, and have a wonderful day. Keep drawing, and as always folks, stay creative.